Do you mind? You mind?
Yeah,
Okay.
of course.
All right, cool.
All right, cool.
So, so I want to invite my friend Lou Neff to come join us. Oh, you lost that chair. That's her.
No, I'll take a different chair.
That's her chair.
Out of a chair. You know what I mean?
That is.
Oh no! All right.
Sorry,
Fair enough.
That's Emma's. That's
My
Emma's chair.
clumsiness got in the way then, man. I'm sorry.
So, yeah, that was that chapter took me about 6 months to write. It was very, very painful. But Lou, who joined us today for a direct action here in Austin, in a rally, Lou was also at Standing Rock. So,
For sure.
thanks for.
Yeah. I'm glad you picked that chapter to talk about because it was. I've been involved in. My family's been involved in protest movements like generations, back to back. They're heavily involved in the Russian Revolution. My grandma, you know about this, so
Yeah.
but my grandma led riots in Detroit, unionizing auto workers in the 1930s. My grandfather started the first workshops for differently able people in America in the 40s to help them develop job skills so they could learn to be self-sufficient. My uncle Arno right now is a doctor who treats asylum seekers, documenting their torture rooms so they can work through their cases in immigration court. My dad was a civil servant and a lawyer for 40 years and with environmental law, and then retired and went right into border protection. And my mom taught theater arts to incarcerated youth for 40 years. So like my family has like a long history of stuff. I've been like involved in activism, labor organizing, pretty much my whole adult life. And Standing Rock was a crazy experience, man. I remember being in a tent in a snowdrift, like digging out a snowdrift to like sleep in a tent in the blizzard out there. And I remember just, when I was there, the encampment was already huge.
Yeah.
Huge. I mean, there were more people than you could ever hope to meet.
Like 10,000.
And I remember being like really surprised with both the extremity of the narrative, where there was this crazy violence that was sort of happening all the time, and then also the mundane, day-to-day nitty-gritty of like having to dig out places where people could go to the bathroom, building structures where people could go inside, because it's freezing in the Dakotas. I mean, it feels like you're on like a Star Wars planet of death snow.
It's so
You know
cold.
what I mean? It's so
It's like 1,000 needles. And I was like, you take off your glove for a few minutes, and it's like 1,000 needles in your hand.
And I remember like people were assigned tasks and things like that. And I remember like my task was like something as simple as just inventorying all the food. Like how many apples do we have? How many potatoes are there? All this like stuff is just like these kind of like routine things. And I was kind of hoping you could talk a little bit about, because I think that some of the narrative of direct action and these crazy sort of moments, we see that, I think the violence gets promoted really well, but what a lot of people don't understand is like the day-to-day organizational interdynamics, the inner politics of the group sometimes, which can be really difficult to navigate.
Very, very difficult.
There were a lot of huge personalities, people that did not get along. There were there were people who were fighting for different people to go in different directions. And I'd like to, you have a lifetime of history and sort of this stuff, and like working with big personalities. And I think I was really curious to hear like what your takeaway from navigating these sort of more day-to-day aspects of like dealing with these really difficult, like in a hostile climate, surrounded by hostile people, and you still have to develop this sort of day-to-day community. And like, how do you navigate that with big personalities? Do you have any advice or sort of insights into that?
Yeah,
I'm really curious.
Absolutely. It's tremendously complicated because you have populations of people who have hundreds of years of historical trauma, hundreds of years of genocide, and so that's a baseline. And then on top of that, they're growing up in a racist country, a colonized country, where even up until 1978, it was illegal to practice the Native American religion. Okay, very complicated already. The amount of trauma is unimaginable for many people. Of course, there are lots of communities, and we've also, you cannot have lived in America and not suffered trauma. It's impossible. Okay? But that's a baseline. But for people who have, grown up, I think for a lot of the, especially white people, the thousands of white people, there was a real culture clash, right? And so for me, what happens all the time, especially in these groups, is something I call the bucket of crabs. So I don't know if anyone's heard this analogy, but if you know this, but crab fishermen actually don't cover, they either dig a hole or they just put the crabs in a bucket. And they don't need to cover it because all the other crabs will pull each other down. Okay? So for me, that is a perfect metaphor for a lot of leftist spaces, and certainly working with a lot of frontline communities. And you'll see it all the time. People are attacking each other. There's factionalism. And you'll see as soon as, and it's a very different culture. If you spend any time with indigenous people, their culture is really not conducive to some of the people who emerged as leaders. So it's you're really supposed to be humble, very, very humble. But then you have other people who emerge as big profiles, right? They get a lot of attention. And so you just have all this infighting. But then you have factions of people who are very committed to nonviolence and peaceful and prayerful. And then there are other groups who, there are other groups, one group in particular, who had a sort of a different, a different idea about what that was. Now that never manifested on a group level, but the tension of ideas of theory of change, whether you're kind of coming from the old school American Indian movement, which was not fundamentally about peaceful nonviolent resistance, fundamentally. So you have different theories of change colliding. And I would say probably one of the most harrowing experiences I had was being caught in the middle of these rival factions, and one person got caught in the middle, and they were authentically afraid for their life because they thought that this person was an infiltrator, something we call snitch jacketing, and they're 100% were infiltrators. There's no question. But for me, to answer your question, when I get caught in the middle, when I have gotten caught in the middle and had to deal with, and sometimes it'll come, I'll have to take, I'll have to take a lot of flack directly. But for me, it's like I get to glimpse for just a moment, like what the pain of that historical trauma is. So for me, the takeaway is, it is very important to me to do the work of dealing with my own trauma so that I can have more capacity to just be there and not react, to kind of hold space. Yeah, I don't know. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I'm directly answering the question.
I'm understanding. It's learning how to be calm within a storm, right?
Yeah.
Because if you lose control of yourself and you become reactive, it can kind of like incite further.
But it's not. It's more. Yes. So like doing the meditation and the mind, like that helps a lot. Doing therapy, that helps a lot. But also colonization is we have become infected by it. So it is like some kind of disease of the mind. And so we're bringing these. If you live in America, we have internalized patriarchy, we have internalized white supremacy, we have internalized misogyny, we have internalized colonization, and especially as white people, we've just grown up with it, and so we unconsciously bring that with us, and BIPOC people bring it in an internalized way, in a different way, but so I have to actively. Some people call it indigenize, some people say decolonize, but I have to really examine I have to do the work to heal my own trauma, and also to get a deeper awareness of how these paradigms live inside of me and can manifest in all sorts of weird ways. And it requires a lot of resilience to do that. And most people don't. I actually describe it as being very, very similar, all those paradigms, to alcoholism. And if you've ever had any experience with addiction or alcoholism, go to someone who's suffering from alcoholism and addiction and say, hey, you should stop. Right? What happens? They go, I don't have a problem. Right? That's the essence of fragility. So having to navigate all that stuff is, I guess that's what I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Well, here, I'll try to, I want to follow, I'll
Sure.
reframe it for a bit. It sounds like that's like a lot about how you deal with it internally.
Well, no, but I have to deal with that internally so that I can be in relationship with these people in a very stressful environment.
And I guess to sort of like clarify there, do you feel like you developed any sort of like specific tactics for when? Because I think people have this really rose-colored view of like leftist movements or like political resistance movements. It's sort of, and you know, the idea of collective, I think, is really deceptive. It's what it is a bunch of individuals and with strong emotional lives, right? That's why they sort of get involved in these kind of movements, is that you are strongly emotional people who react strongly to injustice, you react strongly to the world. And so you have this innumerable group of people who have these intense emotions and intensely cultivated ideologies, right? And with ideology comes this idea of like, I understand the situation, so I have a solution for it. And my solution is a better solution than your solution, right? And everybody, there's a tendency for a lot of people to have the solution and to not want to let go of that solution to try and find sort of work together.
Well, I think that reminds me of what you were saying also, in that like evaluating like our internalized sense of white supremacy, like the idea that the solution I have is the right one, is the best one, or that we feel like it needs to be, instead of like we can all have these solutions, is like, I imagine part of the culture clash between like white activists coming in and people coming in who have like more experience with collectivist ways of like deciding and planning.
Well, it's part of that is the colonized mentality, and the white supremacist mentality is you're conditioned. I am conditioned to automatically assume that what I have to say is most important, and I'm conditioned that way. And if I bring that into a space where, especially in indigenous space, it's not going to play, man. It ain't going to play, you know. And a lot of people had a really bad time trying to get the learning curve, because these people are very good at what they do. They're the ones who are fighting pipelines. Like, they're better organizers than you. Like, they've been fighting pipelines. They're always the people fighting pipelines. But yet some person comes in from whoever, you know, wherever Des Moines, like, knows that. So part of it, you asked the question like tips or tactics. It's just kind of shut the fuck up.
That's a great tactic.
You know what I mean?
A lot of people could practice that.
And just like you want to, it's just like just keep it inside, man, for a minute, and it takes a long time to just kind of listen, you know. Now I will say that there is a flip side to that too. There is a flip side to that, because there were some very, very old school organizers, and I think that could have made a bigger impact, tactically speaking. But again, you know, it's not our party, man. You know, it ain't our party.
And sort of I wanted to talk to. Speaking of that, it's like so I spent a year working in New Mexico, a lot of time on reservations, working with a lot of natives, and like, you know, it's funny because every time I was working with them, they would all call themselves Indians, and it was like very confusing, right? Because I was like, man, you know, I've been taught, you know, I should, you know, that's not how. But they would be openly like, this is, you know, they would just be referring to themselves as Indians all the time. We're Indians, this, that, and the other. And we sort of quickly came to this understanding, if you spend time on the reservation, that it is a different universe. You know what I mean? That where they grow up, how they grow up, you start talking to people, and they grow up in different places, but they all kind of have connections through different tribes, and they all these guys know each other in various ways. It's especially in the acting world, like, if you know one of those guys that've been in like every single movie you've ever seen, right? You know what I mean? You're like, holy shit, Kevin Costner has shot the same dude like 50,000. He's danced with, you know, whoever the fuck. But it's, these guys are always the ones called on to work in every single thing. And so they all know each other, and it's kind of a small community, and there's like, they have the conflicts that people have. But talking to them, you start to understand that reservation life is different.
It's like a third world country.
It's a different universe than the rest of it. I mean, there's different universes everywhere in America, but the reservation is a very specific one. And like, if you could talk to sort of like that experience of like, your sort of encounters with reservation life, and sort of like,
I can't. It's like, so for me, that's not for me to talk about.
Just mean
right?
from your perspective.
I get, from my perspective.
Not about how they live or how.
No,
they
I know. I'm
live,
just saying.
like,
Even I just, for me, like, I actually would. I personally would, like, on a reservation, like I wouldn't even speak on that personally.
Okay.
But I can say, like, spending a lot of time and also practicing what they call the Red Road Ways. Like, that's a big part of my life. And actually, the indigenous ceremonies were how I got put back together. I mean, I'm actually though more curious also what your experience was at camp, like how it changed you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a part of the thing was just like you quickly realized that, or I quickly realized that like this isn't one thing. This isn't one thing, and I'll be honest, like it's gonna sound cynical, but I immediately didn't have a lot of hope after I'd been there for a bit because I saw the disarray.
You saw the fighting,
I saw the fighting, I saw the factionalism, I saw the tendency towards internecine sort of friendly fire power struggles, right?
Yeah.
Where I saw a lot, and this is something I've seen throughout all my time. Like, and I talked about this a little bit today at this rally we were doing, where I'm like, man, I've been protesting at God knows how many things and organizing and God knows how many different venues. And I've just seen a lot of defeat, man. Like, I've just taken L after L after L after L. And so, like, there's a part of me that wants to have this, like, conversation about what I've seen out there, which is that it is way more difficult and way less together than I think we tell the story sometimes. And, like, for me, like, the takeaway was, like, man, this is so important, and I can see how much people care. And I can see the total fracturing of that care.
But I think
constantly.
For context, though, I think another perspective, and there was a ton of an amazing amount of infighting and things that happened that didn't get told. But I think it's also important to balance that with the understanding that you have an instant city that popped up. There's a 10,000. That is 3 times bigger than the town I grew up in, right. and they had to all of a sudden cobble together, because people just showed up. Right? They just we ended up making I ended up helping make a video for the veterans. So there were 2,000, supposed to be 2,000 veterans that showed up, and I went to one of the Standing Rock women leaders, Phyllis Young, and she's like, okay, 2,000 people are going. I was like, yeah, what if 4,000 come? And she was like, and then she's like, she just left. But then they had to come up with, how do you now govern and take care of, and it is life and death situations. On top of that, you're fighting the most incredible opposition, and so I think that. But again, I understand and share a lot of those frustrations, and a lot of us did. A lot of us did. But I think it's also important to balance that with like, shit, man. How do you figure? There's no playbook for that.
No, exactly.
This had never happened before.
I think that's something that I'm really curious about, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, I want to stop losing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like, you can see the magnetism that these issues have. You can see there's these flashpoints periodically.
Yeah.
Where suddenly everybody lights up and gets involved. And, like, you just hear the conversations with people you never thought would have that conversation before, right? All of a sudden they're like, yeah, man, I'm in. What do you need? People driving and buying water and like getting supplies for people they've never met, and like going out of their way in ways that are like totally alien to the person and the lifestyle they were living before this moment. But to me, what I see is I see that side of it, right? I see that beautiful side, and then what I see is 10 years later, there's the pipeline. And it's hard to me to be like, well, at the end of the day, the guy, for me at least, the guiding principle is like, how the fuck do we stop that pipeline?
Okay, that's
you know
that.
what I mean?
Okay, that is why I wrote this book.
No, I know, but that's what I want to talk to.
So,
about, like, how do we navigate those moments? Where
so that
do
is
something different.
That is the most important question. And I wrote up this 400-page book, which originally was like 750 pages. And the publisher was like, "Cool, great job, gold stars." But no one's going to read a 750-page book about organized. And I said, "That's fair, right?"
Yeah, like,
so, but
distill it down to, but yeah.
But again, I wrote this book because it is a theory of change that is such a huge question. Like, how do you engineer so you can extrapolate from here some principles, okay? And I think, and I'm gonna try to condense what is a book-long answer into a. I'm gonna try to boil it down as much as I can into a few ideas.
Okay.
And I think some of them, like, how do you stop a pipeline? First off, consider the resources of the opposition. The first step is actually understanding what the opposition is, what their tactics are, how do they organize. Most people go into activism not having a single clue what that is.
They're coming as idealists.
Right. Well, I see a problem and I want to do it, but you don't understand what the machinery of the system is, how efficient it can be. When what I call the corporate state, when you have them working together. Okay. So first, start there. Plus, I call it's like the Bad News Bears versus the New York Yankees. Right? You have us. We do have people, and there are some exceptionally gifted people, but you also see on the opposition have six-figure consultants that are paid to just fuck us up. And they're working with elected officials, they're working with police chiefs, they're working with mayors, and they're colluding to figure out how they're going to stop this thing that you're doing. And we're right. History, the law, DAPL should not have happened. But they're like, oh, it's the native land. Let's just shove the pipeline. They wanted to put it through Mandan, through Bismarck, the white neighborhoods, and the white people were like, no, we don't have a pipeline. We're like, oh, well, let's just shove it through the reservation, right?
In Nevada right now.
Right. So and a ton of other. I mean, President Biden greenlit like 5,000 new things. But getting back to your question, and then on the other side, like, what is the theory of change that actually can help us win? So I call it Be the Revolution because one part of it is absolutely capacity building for myself as a person, as an activist, to be a whole human being, and to develop my leadership capacity so that I can do hard things. And I level my skills up to a point where I have the capacity to, like, we did a hard thing.
No, I was going to say, listen, you're an engine, man. Like, you're an engine, you know what I mean? So that's why it's like, I want people to hear what you think, because I think you're part of the thing is how exhausting this lifestyle is.
It's very hard.
And how fatiguing it is, and how demoralizing it is. And you're an engine, man. You keep going.
Thank
and
you.
You've been through so much, so it's like I feel like if we talk honestly right now, we gotta start having that conversation because I think you have some real insights through your experience about what we can do differently going forward and how we can try some different ideas because we have to start either. I think honestly framing. I think that what you said about the opposition is really interesting. Right?
Yeah.
We need to honestly understand what we're up against. It's not just like convincing people with a couple TikToks or some videos. It's not like go to a couple protests and wave some banners around. It's bigger than that. You know, and the violence that will be used against us is very real. And they, when that line needs to be crossed, they will cross it. They'll cross it repeatedly, and then they will trot out the same, lies about how we provoked the violence, that we were the agent provocateurs, that they were really just, they're peace officers.
Right, but but here's to your point.
We're law breakers.
But you have people who like Dallas Goldtooth, right? You know Dallas? Okay, so Dallas is on he's on Reservation Dogs. Very funny, very good actor. But he's also he was a very, very legit, Keystone XL fighter, Indigenous Environmental Network. I hope I don't get this wrong, but I think he coined the term water protector. Now, that was really brilliant because they're of course going to frame the movement as violent, and we're protesters, okay? But by branding us water protectors, baked into that messaging is we're not here to protest, we're not here to be violent, we are here to protect the water, right? So part of that is understanding the cultural narrative, understanding how they're going to smear your movement, and then being able to game it out, like know in advance how, like we know now, like if you could go in a time machine back to Occupy, right? We would know now that they would, find all sorts of ways to frame us as disorganized. We didn't have anything. Like they don't even know what they want. It's not true. But I do believe in terms of how do you take this to market? What do I do with all this? I really believe that one of the takeaways is that the most profound change happens on the local level. Okay, so, and within that, even working on the local level, it's very hard to get anything done on a federal level. It's so corrupt. The swamp is so deeply entrenched. It's very, very hard. It moves slow and by design. But on a city or state level, we passed, when I say coalition, we got LA City Council to divest $8 billion from Wells Fargo and change the entire system, okay? We passed public banking on a state level, and which that should never happen. That's crazy. But the way we did that was and I wasn't the lead organizer in that campaign, but building, like for me, I'm a Fred Hampton guy. Like Fred Hampton's Rainbow Coalition, simply if you can build a coalition of the folks, he built a coalition of the different groups, and that's why they killed him. It's such a dangerous idea to bring together folks that are generally in these little silos. But if you can bring Standing Rock, that's what it did. It brought all of these. There were Palestinian organizers, there were unions, there were Black Lives Matter, like 500 tribes, Bernie supporters and progressives, all together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, speaking of Fred Hampton, this is sort of something I was sort of thinking about from what you were saying, and it was this. Been reading a lot of old philosophers, and like there's a different kind of relationship to politics in the sort of Greco-Roman era, right? Like the Greeks and the Romans had some real fucked up notions about slavery, but they also had some really interesting ideas about the body politic and what it meant to engage politically, and how there could be no private freedom without public freedom. And one of the greatest things you could do, the greatest life you could lead, was a political life, right? Political action, and to give your life to political action was the greatest thing you could do. And I think about some of the most successful modern civil movements of the past 100 years. The civil rights movements of the 60s, when we got massive legislation passed that really changed a lot of things, right? And then India liberating itself from the British, right? Which was a people-led movement. And the only connective thread, same thing with Fred Hampton here, unfortunately, the only connective thread that I can find is like 3 words: great personal sacrifice, right? It's the willingness to give up pretty much everything in order to see the change you want to see in the world. Like all of these people right there, all these terrible string of assassinations in the 1960s, Gandhi going on the hunger strike, right? People who are willing to put themselves through intense, who are willing to risk great personal things, right? Their lives, essentially. And what I see now in these movements, I witness a lack of that, right? To some degree, right? And I witness a sort of like, we go here but no further, right? Yeah. And I think, like, when I look at the movements that were successful, and these are tragic stories. Sure. But all I see, the only thread that I see that ties the few successful movements, great personal sacrifice of individuals that no one asked them to do, right? And so I think about, like, is that something that we need to start thinking about more? Not violence.
Well, to me, this is the
willingness to put ourselves farther out on the limb than we're comfortable with.
That's going to be that's a big conversation. It's a personal choice, right? So for me, my moment happened in Occupy. I got hit in the ribs with a police baton. I went, oh shit, the class war is real, right? Okay, but it didn't. I wasn't. Over time, I think a lot of people who stood up for George Floyd, who stood up for Gaza, what I think what I hope people take away is, for me, it is absolutely personal sacrifice. This work will absolutely break your heart. You will lose. It will be difficult. But I would say that who I am as a person and the experiences, I would never have met you, man.
Yeah,
Like, we wouldn't have had this thing today. So what is worse, far worse, is the soul-crushing existential dread of being in an atomized late-stage capitalist society where you're just alone and watching this stuff go down on your computer, feeling like you're on the fucking Titanic and you're heading towards the iceberg and there's not a goddamn thing you can do about it, okay? What is better is getting together in an anarchist bookshop, like Monkey Wrench, and getting together with some folks and saying, hey, there's this thing that we want to look at. And there's all sorts of different ways. Part of it is, I will say this, the thing that's lost in this entire narrative is, some people come and go, but they're, like, at Standing Rock, we did do that. We did do that. These are people who we were ready to. Cornel West said this to me one time. I asked him, I said, Dr. West, what do we need to do to actually build a movement that works? Same question. And he said, well, back in the day, and he named some of his mentors. He said, in the civil rights movement, we had spiritual exemplars who were willing to fight and die for one another. Okay, so there is some of that, and at the same time, I don't want people to think like it's either I sacrifice myself like Fred Hampton, or it's nothing. There is an it's. I would say just start out, and then that's a personal conversation to really confront within ourselves, and it's a personal choice, because I know people have made a huge impact and then they dipped out, right? I think of it more like a team, and everybody's got a role to play, right? Some people might be good at TikTok can be useful, right?
Sure.
Now, where it falls off is if you think TikTok and posting on social media is a theory of change. It is not. It is not. That alone is not a theory of change. And I think people will get the illusion that I'm doing activism because I'm posting on social media. And that is not, I will say it a different way, that is not a complete, that's not going to get you the world you want. It's not going to stop you the things that you want to stop, right? But there's all sorts of different roles for everybody. And the main thing is, it's a big piano, and the more people who have their hands on the piano, if you read the old labor, your parents and your lineage, long line of people who quite literally, but the wonderful thing is that each generation, like the lift that we have, we face absolutely life-threatening things, and at the same time, when you read the mine wars, if you read about the mine wars, if you read about the labor movement, if you read about each generation, makes it a little easier for the next. And having said that, I also do hope people do confront the sort of narcissism of our society that is really it's performative. So I do hope people confront that aspect you're saying and go deeper and say, boy, I really, because I gotta say, we just mobilized, tried to mobilize coalition to elevate what Greg Abbott's doing. But man, this is not a drill. We have two crises: the climate apocalypse and fascism as a global phenomena. And we have never seen a fascism like this today. So you are absolutely correct, and at the same time, I don't want everybody to be scared.
No. I think what you're saying is totally right.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll kind of wrap up with a few or something like that. But I think that like you said, it's what you can. It's the more people that contribute, the better it is. Obviously, right? But I think that the challenge, is how do we do more, right? And I think, like you said, that's a super personal question. a super personal question, but I think it's a question that needs to be asked, right? Because there are individuals out there who are going to be able to give more, and I think we need to normalize being like, one, having a real honest conversation about, like you said, climate apocalypse. It's not climate change.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is the desertification of the entire globe. This is a mass a refugee movement like we're never going to have experienced. The world has never experienced before. We're going to be seeing the collapse of whole countries pretty soon, right? I mean, on a scale that's unprecedented in our lifetime, unprecedented lifetimes before us. We're seeing a weaponized surveillance state that is completely radical.
Yeah, it's
new.
We've never seen
right?
anything like that.
Like
Yeah.
what's happening in China right now is their ability to monitor the public, their ability to surveil us at all times. And, you know, as little as this thing called surveillance pricing, where they now know where we buy things on our, like where our IP is. They know where we're buying, they know how much income we have, and they individually turn up the price as high as they can on each person, so that they can like gouge as much out. So there's no like the price. We are in a network, a hostile network that is expansive and inclusive in a way that we've never seen before. And so I think like we need to start thinking, in my opinion, like realistically about what it's going to take to overcome that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a difficult conversation to have, and it is a scary conversation, but these are scary times.
Well,
So I think we need to have those.
I want to piggyback on something you were talking about earlier about how we're being with each other, and I want to also, like, if anyone has any questions. Did anyone have any questions, or anything they wanted to ask or come up?
Sorry, yeah.
No pressure. Nothing comes up.
Here we go.
Good.
We had some, I guess, like obviously with the encampments last April, the student encampments for Palestine, there were a lot of experiences, and like you have talked about, like a lot of trauma. I'm curious what like sort of the aftermath of Standing Rock was like for you, like how you recovered from like not only being like physically hurt,
Yeah.
but also like holding on to that revolutionary optimism and like what that felt like for you and what helped you through that process.
It's a great question. So for me, it wasn't just Standing Rock. It was like 2016, and then going immediately into Standing Rock. So I would say that in the book I used the term annihilated, reduced to nothing. The last thing I did after I left Standing Rock, after we fled. Do you remember? I don't know if you were there for the storm, but we've like fled. We fled camp because the storms got so were very bad. And then I went immediately into organizing this direct action where we shut down a bank with Jane Fonda, which was the first time like we were doing that kind of thing. As soon as I finished, and I had like 8 days to pull that whole thing off. When I got home after that, I couldn't get out of bed for 2 weeks. No, like legit, like 2 weeks. And it probably, I had to take 6 months solidly, completely off. And then that's how I started doing Sweat Lodge regularly. That helped a lot. But I needed to take time to really take care of myself because I was not in any shape. I could barely function. I could really, literally barely function. There's an incredible medicine, though, just in doing that. In that process. Because at some point, I don't think I ever thought I would do anything else after that. Like, I couldn't even, then plus there's mourning, there's grief, there's depression. And in that state, you can't even, like, I don't even think I could imagine myself ever even doing anything like that again. Plus, because of bank exit, I was getting some pretty heavy like surveillance experiences and like threats because we were threatening the money system, and I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. But what happens is, it's like a heartbreak, right? If you've ever been in a relationship and have your heart broken, you can't ever, immediately after, you can't ever imagine you're ever going to find anyone else ever again, and I'll never be able to love again. I'll never be able to trust again. But if you do the work, you'll have a greater capacity to love. If you do the work. Now, if you don't deal with your shit, you're going to bring that shit into your next relationship, right? So it's the same thing with movement organizing. And that's why it's the conversation's changed in recent years, but when I started writing this in about 8 years ago, not as much. But that's why I'm a real big advocate for really doing the work to like heal and take care of yourself, because you know the next moment will come, or you'll create the next moment, right? I'm not sure. Did that help?
Yeah.
Can I take a step? I'm gonna,
Yeah, please.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
I just want to offer another sort of viewpoint on, and there's something that like I've been doing this thing like I just call it like emotional training essentially, and it's the opposite. It's sort of like a kind of the opposite in some ways. I think it marries well with what you're talking about. I think you do these two things together. I think it'd be really good because I'm preparing myself for what's coming, right? And I'm like gearing up to be a part of like whatever the fuck is out there and however I can participate. And so for me, it's like I'm an emotional person, and when I like, you know, if I ever catch Fox News or whatever the fuck, you know, Breitbart or what, with Reddit, weird fucking subreddits now or whatever online, or you know, the right-wing agitator dude who was there today, right? I have this tendency to get riled, like my heart rate. I can feel my heart rate just like start pounding. I can feel like energy surging through me. And so what I've been doing, as opposed to like normally I just like, you know, years prior I would just like stay away from those kinds of situations, those kind of media outlets, because I'm just getting angry for no reason. And I realized as Trump was winning again this year that I needed to acclimate myself to things I don't want to see. So what I do is I turn on the channels where I know it's bullshit propaganda. And I go into content that I know I will find appalling. And what I do is I practice regulating my heartbeat, right? I practice breathing. I practice staying rational. I practice staying calm, because I'm going to be confronting these people, right? Like I'm going to be on the front lines of these conflicts. And what I need to do to be able to participate in those things, I need to be my best, my calmest, my most rational, my most sane self, right? And so I don't think that this is an old concept, right? This is like how back in the day people used to prepare for terrible conflict, right? It's like, okay, we're going to practice like meditating our way through conflict, as opposed to meditating as a form of healing post-conflict, right? And so for me, it's like I'm now actively every day trying to like practice confronting realities that are reading about the climate, reading about the detentions that are occurring, right? Reading about, you know, parents getting stripped away from kids, right? You know, I'm reading about police brutality. I'm reading about corruption in office. I'm reading about, you know, attacks against trans and queer rights. And I practice every single time taking in that information, remaining appalled, remaining motivated, but not letting it change my sort of emotional ecosystem in the same way. So I can learn to stay a human being in the midst of an inevitable, chaotic, hostile climate. And I think, like, for me, that it feels like there's something there. You know what I mean?
Well, something
feels
that's working for you, like in terms of building resilience and being able to look in the face of these issues and not, you know,
I think it's like to me, it's like, yeah, it's like the idea is like we can be stronger than what we're facing. We can remain compassionate, we can remain empathic, but we don't have to. We can look this in the eye and stay strong and not be devastated in the same way, because the only way we're gonna get through it is by facing it. And so like I think that kind of emotional training to stay calm and to stay in control and to stay okay, even in really tough situations, is a really useful practical tool for me.
Yeah. Awesome. Does anyone else have another way that works for them? Or do you have a question?
I mean, that kind of reminds me of like a lot of what has affected the way that I move politically has been like I grew up in a pretty horrifically abusive situation, but it's also one of the ones where like my parents are not going to own up to it, none of my family's going to acknowledge it, and so like for me, learning to like, it used to feel very comfortable to stay in that dissonance and to not face any of the uncomfortable things about like what I've been through or like the people my parents are, or like any of that. but that does not keep me safe. That is not like, that is not a life I can continue living, and that like, the kind of like skills to like root through the dissonance and like look at the things that make me uncomfortable and then learn how to sit there with like that is horrific, and I've got to be in it, or I am not safe, or I'm with these people who were still like super dangerous, and that like moving through that, I think, changed my like nervous system in a way that has changed my politics massively, because now when I come up against like political ideas that feel super challenging or like point out some dissonance to me, it's like, okay, this is making me really uncomfortable, or this is like distressing or whatever it is, but I've gotten to a point where it's like, I'm finally at a point where it's like instinct to like sit in that and like be like, okay, how do I like get used to the fact that this is here, instead of just trying to push it away, and like, because that doesn't keep us safe. Like, we have to be able to confront these things, and it does feel very like nervous system based. Like, it's learning how to feel like in myself and present when I'm with these horrific things, instead of like shoving it away and trying to live in the dissonance, which I think is where most people are, who are like, at the least, if you're living a life where that is an option, which like I was not. There was a point where that was not an option anymore. And I think that's even like, it kind of, when you were talking earlier about like, you know, great personal sacrifice being part of this, is that I think that that's people who are in a position of privilege where they have that option to live comfortably. There's only so much that we are never going to be able to convince all of them, but that we don't have to, because there are so many people already like living in the horde who have no option but to like really face it head on. And I think that is where a lot of like the organizing power lies, really, is the people who are like, you know, I mean, like with labor movements, you can have someone come in who like has all of the education about like, oh, how do we organize, how do we protest, how do we strike, and whatever, but that like the power is with the people who are like in such a fucked up situation that they are like, that it's not an option not to do this stuff.
Yeah, totally. Makes sense. I mean, but that's a good, comes back to the point, the labor organizers now, and that's also one of the premises of the book, of how there's an unbroken chain from Occupy to Bernie Sanders, Standing Rock, to these various movements of people that have continued to get activated at different points. But now there's this incredible, like the people who are working on Bernie campaigns are now starting ALU. Like they're starting now they're actually starting Amazon labor, you know, like they're doing crazy shit. Like occupiers, like they're doing amazing things, and it's this unbroken lineage. You know what I mean? And I think, but you're talking about the labor organizers, and today we're not getting to the extent that they faced in the earlier stages of the labor movement. We're not getting murdered, you know, like so many murders, like that people take for granted the 40-hour work week and 8-hour work day, and you know what I mean? Like, but the point is, the people who are organizing against Tesla or against Amazon or against it, like it's a little bit easier now, and I think the goal should be. Now, it's again, I'm not arguing for incrementalism, because we unfortunately are in a remarkable time that we actually don't have the luxury of incrementalism, but I think it should be heartening to know that our goal, like for me, that all I hope to do is I hope that we can keep this world in the game for the young generations to take over, because I know the young people now are going to do a way better job. I just know that. So if we can fight hard enough to keep the human race in the game and keep our society not completely falling to oligarchs and fascism and fascist oligarchs, you know, I think we could be optimistic. But I want to say we're probably reaching the time. Yeah. So just want to thank Monkey Wrench Books, our fun advocates friends, and I want to thank Lou. Thank you for coming out, man.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to hear you talk and hear you read your book. And I'm so glad to meet you guys. Yeah, right?
Yeah, I love it. He's one of the real motherfuckers here. Like, You know, like people that like know you as an actor, but they don't know. Like they're like, my great grandmother dated Lennon. I'm like, okay.
My great grandma was like one of Lennon's mistresses.
Wow. So, anyways, you know, thank you. Have a couple copies. Got some T-shirts and stuff.
It's a great read. It's a really he's lived a life, man. And I really recommend like digging in because you've been through it, man.
Well, you were there too.
I know, but I didn't write a book, so it's all up here.
It's true. Writing books is hard.
It is. It's pretty demoralizing.
Well, thanks, y'all.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thank you to Ren and
Thank you for
McGuire.
printing that.
Oh yeah.
And we got some sweet zines.
I also, there's one,
Thank you so much.
I was like frantically searching around for it earlier while we were talking, and I realized the reason I couldn't find it is because I got it from here like a year ago, but I have a copy of one. If you're up for taking two home with you, I have a different one to give you.
Oh,
I'm gonna grab it from, I'll be right